played in Rome and out of Rome and toured Northern Europe and Italy and various places. Played something like 200 concerts in the first couple of years, 2 or 3 years. But there were always sort of problems that came up. So the first LP that we issued was this one. And this was released by Earl Brown, who you may know from Cage's, one of Cage's cohorts. The thing with this LP is it's very well produced. Earl was an engineer, actually, by training, as well as a composer. However, somehow the labels got reversed.
But not on all of them.
But not on all of them, exactly. So that really made it confusing, because you couldn't just say to somebody, it's the other side. You could say, maybe it's the other side. And then the other side is our old friends, A&M Music with Cornelius Cardew and Keith Rowe. But, and the music is good, but frankly, I think our side is better. But most people think that our side is the other side. But not all, because you never know. So that was a sort of Cagean, maybe an unexpected chance. But for your information, if you do listen to it, the side with the long silences is not us. That's Cagean interpolated silences, according to some scheme of Cardew or these guys. So that was the first, and then, let's see, then I guess the second one might have been this one, which is a very strange one, which Alvin recorded with a portable Ewer tape recorder.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a copy.
You don't? I'll sell it to you. It's, I think it was recorded mono.
You definitely recorded mono, but the Uher tape recorder. It was recorded in the public toilets of the Museum of Modern Art of Paris.
Right.
In the bathroom?
In the bathroom.
In the bathroom.
In the men's room.
In the men's.
Yeah, but we don't have co-ed toilets in Paris in 1960.
I don't know.
It's the resonance.
Whatever it was a hugely resonant space, and it followed a concert. But you tell us.
It was just a part of the audience, because the audience was actually quite numerous.
It was
Yeah.
very
But, and it was all over the place. It wasn't just there. It was in several parts of
And
the
they also
museum.
they weren't
And-
just an
and-
audience either, they were playing.
Yeah, well, they were singing mostly, and,
Yeah, but they were told to bring instruments to join in. I mean,
but I don't remember exactly what. I do remember I was in myself. It was in this toilet,
yeah.
because it happened to be a very resonant place.
Yeah,
Fantastic place.
everybody sort of migrated there because it had the best sound in the museum, so.
Yeah,
And I think there was a trombone, I don't know whether that was one of us or,
I think that was.
but the trombone is quite prevalent. We could,
That's what
actually, I don't have the turntable.
But who actually did make this recording?
Me.
You did.
Ah,
I was playing trumpet, I think, and then
Mhm.
recording at the same time.
yeah.
So, I mean, it was.
So, this was put out by some Greek gangsters who lived in.
Wait a minute.
Huh? Oh, I shouldn't say that.
No, you shouldn't.
This was put out by some Greek gentlemen who lived in
Statute of limitations.
And of course, should I say whether we got paid or not, or I shouldn't say that either?
We actually did get
No.
paid. Yes, we did.
For this? No.
Yes.
Oh, not from the
But some of us
We
think
got paid because we hung around until we got paid.
That was the concert. It took some doing.
Oh, that's right, yeah, no, we didn't get
Now, they
paid.
put on a famous festival called the Energies Festival, which was in Belgium, just across the French border, because this being 1969, the French authorities, which is the year after 1968, for those of you who are not good with arithmetic, they forbid the festival because it was too close to 1968. So the gentlemen gangsters moved it across the border, and it was an early attempt at what is now the common theme of new music, it seems like, which is mixing genres. So there was like a lot of rock and new jazz, free jazz,
Oh, free
and then
jazz.
us and maybe a couple of other
Yeah.
new music groups. And we played at 6 o'clock in the morning of the last night. It was 40 hours of music, I think.
It was definitely a Woodstock-style event.
Yeah, we wanted to play
Thousands of people in
Yeah.
sleeping bags.
in a tent with about 2,000, I don't know, thousands of people.
Oh, there was more than 1,000.
Yeah, no, there were, it was more like 10,000, I think. It was full.
Huge.
And no doors. Just the one door, I think. I remember Frederic was concerned, and actually when the art ensemble started throwing fire around, and the grand piano was on fire.
They set the,
You s-
yeah, they set the piano on fire.
Yeah, fire was burning, so we moved towards the doors. And then they, after we played at 6, I think they turned off the sound, and then didn't want to pay us, so we went in the back room, whatever that was, and sort of stood around like this, looking at this table that was covered with bills, Belgian franc notes, and said, well, so they did pay us for that.
No, we stayed on for at least one day.
Oh, really? Maybe.
We didn't get paid then.
Oh. Well, no,
We-
not right away, no.
No, we hung around for at least another day, and possibly 2 days.
Mhm.
And then there was a press conference with the Greek,
See, I don't remember all that.
and there was a press conference, and I happened to be there,
Mhm.
and so I asked a question as though I were a journalist.
Oh, this is interesting.
And I
Getting
asked-
all this on tape?
And I asked, well, how come you had this tent with only one exit? And you allowed this event to go, and that's why we got paid.
Oh.
Because at that point, somebody came and took me, said, well, come in here, and they gave me some of these bills that you were talking about. That's how we got paid.
Oh, I'm glad to know that.
You mean they thought you were gonna blow the whistle on the?
Well, I was asking a very embarrassing question.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it was really dangerous.
Oh, it really was. Flames were up.
So, that was our next triumph. This was put out, I don't think, here's Rzewski when he had a dark beard. and a hat.
Oh, God.
So, then, let's see, then there was another one, which actually I have, but I forgot to bring it, called Leave the City. And I noticed this morning, looking on, because somebody told me that, I guess, Will Tesdale told me that there's lots of MEV on YouTube. So I looked, and the first 3 are all Leave the City, which unfortunately none of us are on. This was put out by some French former members of MEV using our name. And I remember,
Well, they had a group in
yeah, called
Paris.
Musica Elettronica Viva.
Yeah.
So, that's, if you do look for us on YouTube, be aware that, if you got directed to this, it might be the other side, and if you got directed to Leave the City,
It's not us.
not us at all. And
Well,
this-
that's like the Monty Python movie Life of Brian, where you
Oh,
have
yeah.
these different groups. The Jewish Liberation Front, and the fighting, they're not to be confused with the Jewish Liberation Army.
Yeah, right.
They had to, so there were all these MEVs going on at the same
Right. And
time.
Alvin had another one of his own a little later, and.
Yeah, but that had a distinct name, that was,
Right, MEV 2.
that was MEV 2.
Yeah.
So,
It's all washed away.
where?
Nowhere, it's gone.
Well, but here we are after 46 years, so how about that?
Yes, but we could be telling complete
Uh-huh.
made-up stories, and nobody can prove we're wrong or right,
Well, that's probably true, but
and nobody cares, even for that matter.
maybe somebody could do a research paper.
Well, there's enough people who have been, I mean, among them, Amy Beale, has written
Uh-huh.
serious stuff. David Bernstein has written serious stuff about MEV.
Right.
I can't think of all the German woman who's written.
Sabina Feist.
Sabina Feist has written very serious doctoral thesis, which we figure prominently in history. And actually, at this very moment, David Toop, who do you know David Toop's writings? Yeah. Well, you should get to know him. He's one of the more authentic, brilliant writers in the English language on contemporary music, with a vast knowledge of everything from Jamaican ska to the latest electronics and stuff. So he really has a great stuff to draw on. Anyway, he's writing a book on improvisation.
Oh, yeah.
Period. And he's asked me to contribute something to it. So especially on MEVs. So I think we should do this collectively in any case.
He wrote to me too, and I think I wrote back, and I'll get back to this later.
Yeah.
I forgot.
I think he needs the article soon, but anyway,
Mhm.
that's,
He's English.
yeah. But there are many excellent books on the theme, on the idea of improvisation. And this will probably maybe be the most inclusive, because it will cover everything probably everything from Elizabethan music on, in terms of improvisation in Western music, and in musics outside the Western practice. I expect it'll be really comprehensive. Yeah.
But only music.
Huh?
Only on musical improvisation.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where else he'll go.
Mhm.
But anyway, I'm just saying that because we will figure into that book as well, so.
So we're still, remember, let's see, do I have any more failures here? Yeah, this came out, and actually this was somehow connected to a major label, but nobody's ever seen it, so I think it was some kind of tax write-off or something. It's
Polydor.
Polydor Records, big time, but, and there's a beautiful cover by
By
Edith Schloss.
Yeah.
And then we get into the CD period, and we've got this one, which we did with AMM. And finally we have, and there are a couple of others I didn't bring. There's one on an Italian label called,
Two on
what's it called?
Alga Margan.
Algamargan. And then this one, which I think I assigned you when we put it online to listen to, which is 40 years of.
Yeah, well, at least this is authenticated by us.
Yeah, this is the real deal. It's very well produced by Paul Ty, who's a regular producer. And it has excerpts of various pieces from 1969, 67, which is Spacecraft, which is a piece that we did a lot in the early days. This book is out. I don't know if anybody's seen it, actually. The library doesn't have it.
Yeah, I just saw the advertisement.
Yeah, I just bought it just to.
Is that all the Source magazines put
10,
together?
first 10
Oh,
issues.
fantastic.
It's excerpts from the
Oh,
thing.
excerpts from?
Yeah.
Oh, not the full source.
Uh-huh, so they did put us in there, even though I never gave them permission, but, and then I had to pay for it, but that's all right. Here's Stockhausen, and here's Harry Parch, and Earl Brown, New Foreman music, and this is quite a good, here's
And they
Giuseppe
have
Carey,
Lockwood, probably, the
Yeah.
Burning piano piece,
Mhm.
those things.
and here's David Tudor, this is Soul, and this is David Tudor, actually, on the cover.
Bandoneon.
And it has some writings by us and some pictures from Berlin in 19. I think I showed all the original one.
Sweet.
In here. Here's John Cage's 433, an early version. So these are the originals came out in the 60s, wasn't it? Late 60s? And early 70s.
Yes, that's right.
Our pictures are in here somewhere. Oh, here's David Behrman and Gordon Mumma and David Tudor.
That's a real source book of the American experimental music.
Yeah, here's
From
John
the-
Cage in an early incarnation with Lajar and Diller when they did a big piece for a computer. And, well,
You're on page 103.
we're on page 103?
Yeah,
Oh, you
look
got
at
it.
Words, the essay words,
Mm.
that it? If there's a
Three.
good picture.
Mhm.
Okay, there we are.
Oh, yeah.
This was in Berlin. I won't read you this stuff because it's a little 60s-ish, at least my part is.
It's okay.
It's pretty great.
What?
It's great. They're all the writings.
Mhm.
You guys have read it?
Well, he brought it in.
Oh, yeah?
He
Yeah, I
brought
wrote in the original,
I
it's
guess.
Yeah.
just falling apart.
Oh.
But I'll get the library to buy this. Or I'll,
It's a really
I'll
good
put this
book.
on reserve maybe.
Mhm.
Compared to Occupy Wall Street, how do these writings rate in terms of revolutionary spirit?
I would say Occupy Wall Street kind of uses more like blunt language
Mm-hmm.
in a way, so it's like easy to digest and you can remember it, like kind of like phrases and sayings.
Mm-hmm.
Your writings are more poetic in a way
Uh-huh.
and kind of maybe more complex.
Like more eccentric too, more revolutionary. The ideas are more revolutionary.
Right, especially considering like the context too.
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone else has like totally different style,
Sorry?
which is interesting.
Everyone.
Everyone has a really different style
Yeah.
of writing.
I'm just curious, I mean, as a point of reference for let's just generically call it changing the system, to quote Christian Wolff. I know from your point of view today, how you see things in terms of, going into the streets and screaming, revolutionary slogans.
Mhm.
How did we get onto this subject, excuse me?
I just improvised.
Alvin just his revolutionary forward.
But how did we get to?
Well, no, I was thinking about the writings in this Source magazine, which I don't even remember what they are right now, but.
Well, the connection between spacecraft and
Oh, yeah,
Occupy
that's in
Wall
But
Street.
how did we get to Occupy Wall Street?
Alvin brought it up.
But why?
Because it's a reference that these young people in this room know something about.
Are you sure? Is this true? Is he telling the truth?
I mean,
Excuse me, he may be right, but,
Who knows
Is that
something
true?
about Occupy Wall Street? Who's ever been there?
There you go.
1, 2, 3, that's it?
That's a lot.
well, not everyone.
4? Mostly not, actually.
Is anyone here who definitely does not like the idea of Occupy Wall Street?
Definitely does not.
Does not.
Yeah, one, anyway.
You don't like the idea? Uh-oh.
I'm just asking because I don't see the connection between talking
Well,
about.
it's the latest movement around that is known to many people. That in terms of American experience and American culture has attempted to directly attack capitalism.
Yes, but what does it have to do with MEV or John Cage?
It has a lot to do with it.
Could you tell me what?
Well, it's part of an ongoing sentiment in the world, not only in this country, but anywhere that you could imagine, where people who feel oppressed express themselves. And I think the MEV music, in part, and a good part, came out of that. And I think the events of today are coming out of this sense of oppression, and not hopeless or helplessness, but on the contrary, the idea that one can inspire the 99%, for example, to actually do something about it. I'm not, this is not a political speech here. These are just facts to explain to my colleague Frederic why I brought this up. And yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the oppression that you thought MEV was born in response to.
Well, first of all, those are all lies, the sense of oppression, because you know, we were all brought up at a time, and you know, literally with silver spoons in our mouths.
Wait a minute.
Hold on, Rzewski. And we had the good fortune to in post-war, post-World War II America in late 40s, 50s, 60s, early 60s even, to experience a moment of luxury, of peace, relative peace in the world as far as we were concerned, even though that wasn't true, and to be able to go through very luxurious education, you know, the best schools and so on and so forth that we imagined at that time. And the oppression came when some of us woke up and found that everybody in our community was not like us, and that there were great inequalities all over the place that were showing signs of change for the better, but not really. This all came to a monumental head in the middle and late 1960s, when spontaneous movements of women, of African Americans, of all kinds of people, and primarily of intellectuals and working people all over the United States and all over the world, came together and said enough is enough, and demanded social justice, economic justice, change, and so on. So we were just part of that huge wave. I mean, we just happened to be in the middle of that wave, and very close to very important key people in the world who were active, really active players. For example, the Living Theater from the United States, who were then living in Europe. This is a group of very dedicated anarchists who were distinctly trying to change things, and did, in terms of practices in contemporary theater. They left a huge mark.
And they're still existing.
It's still existing in the city, in New York City. So those were that, and our meetings with ever so briefly at that time with the people from the Art Ensemble of Chicago, and then quickly after that with individuals like Anthony Braxton and George Lewis, set us right in the center of a very harmonious exchange between what we were thinking and doing artistically, and what they were thinking and doing, both politically and artistically, from a much greater need to change the system from the point of view of Afro-Americans. So those are just some of the things that might give a little background on your to answer your question about what were the needs that brought this about. Yes. So when am I doing this?
I don't know, sounds good though.
Yeah, sounds
Very
great.
interesting.
I think it's boring.
You can leave, Frederic. Why don't
No,
you leave?
I have to stay here.
No, you're bored, get out of here.
No.
No, we'll improvise later.
Oh, Frederic, why do you think it's boring? Why are you
I think
bored?
it's boring to listen to old men talk about what they did 40 years ago.
No. It's not.
That's why he brought up Occupy Wall Street.
But I don't get it, that's what I don't get. What is the relevance of music, this music, to Occupy Wall Street? Because one of the things that I've noticed about this whole movement that's going on today is that there's very little music in it. And if there is any music at all, it tends to be old music, like Give Peace a Chance, or, any of these countless things that people remember from the 60s and 70s.
Even earlier.
There's very, very little
Woody
music in this, in the current political movement, which is, worth discussing.
Does everybody agree with that?
This is a good
or-
point.
Totally.
This is a very good point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that perhaps in the 60s that sort of cultural revolutionary spirit intersected more with the sort of artistic spirit, whereas nowadays I think subversive art and sort of like revolution in terms of cultural and sort of revolutionary political ideas sort of run parallel to each other but don't necessarily intersect in the same way. I wasn't part of the 60s, but that's what it sort of the impression that I'm getting, especially from Occupy Wall Street.
Layla, you-
Yeah, I had a question. In the French economist Jacques Attali,
Totally, yes. I
in
know
his book
I know his book,
Noises, right? He says, quote, music is not a reflection of current society. Society is the reflection of current music.
Mhm.
What do you think about that sentence in relation to what we've been talking about and what you said, John?
Well, I think, these are philosophical propositions, and I think that both propositions are true.
No, it's wrong. This guy, Attali, does not know what he's talking about.
I mean,
It's bullshit.
I know what you mean, and
Do you?
it's kind of wrong. I agree with that, but I'm not asking if it's right or wrong. It's more of a way to formulate
Well, you're
a
asking us
deeper
what we
question
think.
within one sentence because I'm sure you've read the book.
Well, yeah, if I would like to finish my thought. The reason I said both propositions are right because at some time, like the time we're referring to in the 60s, for example, the music and the spontaneity, the ability for a mass of anonymous people to make spontaneous music, which ultimately could derive from any noise with any object in space, which often happened in the case of MEV, mass improvisations, was simply I can't translate that. How do you do that in English? Data de facto. It was a fact.
Fact of life.
It was a fact of life. That's what those times were, and we could count on that, and encourage that. We could steer it. We could compose it. We could decompose it. We could play with it and theorize about it. That the same kind of thing is not happening on Wall Street or in other situations which we don't know about. I don't know. I was at an Occupy in Vancouver when I was there a few months ago, and it was closed immediately. Not immediately, but after a long debate within the city government, they finally closed it down. But I think in different situations, I don't know, for example, there, but Vancouver at that time might have been more inclined to some kind of weird music.
Mhm.
I don't know why I think that, but I do think that. This kind of spontaneous music making, that is the kind that we're talking about from the prehistoric MEV days, is simply not a part of our time now. So in that sense, Atelier is right. The music does not reflect, or the musical simplicity of turning back to Woody Guthrie or to other political musical inspirations is very it's quite normal, and anything else, jazz or spontaneous playing or whatever, it is not. So that does tell you something about our times.
Mhm.
This stuff is not happening in the streets here. That's all it tells you. So there, I'll tell
There
you.
are some musical innovations present in the Wall Street movement. For instance, this technique of, what do they call it, the living megaphone?
Oh, yeah. Human microphone.
Human megaphone, yes.
What's
This
that?
is something that did not exist.
It's,
40 years ago.
It's a process of like sound checking where like one person will yell out a sentence or half a sentence, and then like the closest group to them will yell out the same one, and it kind of like bullseye.
So of course, there's nothing new or original about it.
So that's
but
that's an imitation,
Oh,
like a
that's so
looping.
Right.
It's like
Well, it's like those party games.
Right, but it's not very effective because if you do it with a lot of people, it's very hard to understand what anyone's saying, and you have to say such short phrases for people to remember what they're saying that to get a sentence takes like 45
Yes, it's not very
seconds.
effective, but there's something aesthetically pleasing about it, which is
Right.
why people are doing it.
Doing
And it's
it,
also
right.
because
It's
they banned any type of amplifiers at any.
you can't bring any.
Yeah,
Can't bring
that's
any
it, because
Ah, so it
they
all
want
has to
it,
be
like,
acoustic.
originally by the-
Technology.
Exactly, so that's what they decided to get
interesting.
around that.
That's really a throwback.
It's
I mean,
hard, but you know,
They,
it
like,
works.
at some points during the protest, they've had like speakers and generators, but most of the time, like the police will like turn off their power
Turn off
and
the
like tell them
power.
they're like take away their speakers and say you're not allowed to have
And
them.
there are sometimes groups of people playing various kinds of percussion
Right.
There are a
instruments.
lot of drum circles.
But I think as far as I've been able to observe, there have been for instance, no new songs that have come out of this movement. For instance, and this is quite different from, say, the anti-Vietnam movements of the 60s and 70s, which did produce songs, political songs.
I don't think a lot of
And-
much has been produced.
No.
Like outside of just like music.
No, and this is worthy of consideration. Why is this? Why is there so little music? Why is music, which was undeniably an important force in the social movements of the 60s and 70s? There's no question about it. Why is it absent from the current counterparts of these social movements?
I think if we look beyond Occupy and think about radical movements as a whole in America, there's plenty of music and art, like new art and new music. There's like a new theater. There's like the Golden Puppet Theater group
It's
in
not new.
Vermont.
Yeah, it comes out
Yeah,
of the
new,
60s.
but they're still doing. They're making new work.
are.
Well, we're still alive too.
Right, but then there's also.
It doesn't make us
But
new.
it's not like there's surely people of your generation, but there's also people of our generation that are creating new work under their guise. And there's like the Beehive Collective in Machias, Maine. And there's plenty, I think, of underground music that is politically motivated that maybe is not connected to Occupy.
Could you just give me some examples? I have, let me just add that I have a purely a selfish motive for asking this question.
Okay.
Because I've been invited to some kind of festival in France next
Uh-huh.
spring, and I've been specifically asked to put together a program of political music, because that's what the theme of this particular weekend is. And I wrote back saying that, I'm glad to come, but unfortunately, all of the political music I know is from 35 years ago or something like that. And I don't know of anything new, and I've been asking various people, do you know any good political music that I can play?
Right.
And so far, I haven't found any. So please tell me.
Okay, well it probably won't be exactly what you want because it is like riffs on older music, but there's this group called Mischief Brew, I think based in Philadelphia. They're also kind of like taking folk music from the 60s and making it kind of modern.
Well, I can do that too, in fact, I have done.
Right. But they're younger people, right? There are
I
plenty.
don't care, you can be like Pete Seeger is
Yeah, he's still
definitely
doing
an
it.
older guy, but he's still doing
Right.
new stuff.
Right. So that's a good example if you think about that. There's plenty of kind of marching bands.
Oh, yeah, there's the what's the
There's
Asphalt
the
Asphalt
Asphalt
Orchestra.
Orchestra, they're
Is
terrific.
that political?
Bang on a can.
yeah.
Yeah,
There's also
yeah.
What Cheer Brigade.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Isn't that?
The political aspect, I would.
I mean,
political.
they're a street band. I mean, they
Well, they're
post, and they're very, very
Close down
good.
blocks, they march on Broadway for 2-3 blocks.
But they're also funded by Bang on a Can, which
Yeah,
is
it's
very
Bang
well
on a
funded.
Well, look,
Well,
you know.
I just have to say,
By the NEA.
I just have to say, guys, that you're missing something really important, and that's education. What I found in the students that I teach here, I teach a class in electronic music, and 3 people in my class this year didn't know who John Cage was, and didn't know anything, didn't realize that electronic music existed before the 90s. So, Richard found this too. Electronic music means something different to you guys than it does to us old
It's not
folks.
political.
Sorry?
It's not political.
It is, because the right wing defunded all the arts education in public schools. There are no more arts, hardly, in any of the public school systems. Not like it was when I was growing up in the 60s.
Is there political protest electronic music?
No, I'm talking about knowledge about music and how that then integrates into the real world. People don't know as much about the inner workings of music as, I'll speak for myself, as I did when I was growing up in the 60s. So they don't know about history, they don't know that there was a 12, they just don't. I mean, one sort of obvious example, or maybe a cliche example, is there anything, the Rite of Spring that created riots, nothing like that would ever happen in today's world. No art would create riots. People don't care.
I personally don't think that this is the case.
Really.
No, I think this is a myth.
About education?
No riots. The Rite of Spring
okay.
creating riots. There were no riots.
I agree probably.
And in any case, if there was any kind of disturbance of what you're talking about, it was not because of the music.
Yeah, it was the choreography.
It was because of the ballet.
Right.
It was because.
So,
It's still a response to art.
Yeah, the
I'm-
response to art can be really harsh at the time.
I think my point is that there is no visceral reaction to art these days because people are not well educated enough in its history and its practice to care about it.
Well, there was certainly, the last uprising I can think of. Well, actually, we were present at one of them. One of them was in Brussels when Cage was doing a reading. But before that, in the early '70s, at an Empty Words reading, which is an 8. Cage didn't do the whole 8 hours, but he did I think 3 hours at the Opera House in Milan, and that
the university.
Was it the university?
I was there.
Oh, you were, okay, well, you tell about it.
Well, there's not much to tell. He worked for an hour and a half. He sat in front of a microphone and went.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Okay, for an hour and a half, and
Yeah, the audience went nuts.
Well, yes, there were maybe 1,500 students, and this was the time when these students were singing "L'Internazionale di Stalin."
Oh, yeah, wow.
Okay?
Wow.
These kind of students, they were throwing Molotov cocktails at the police and so on, and after 10 or 15 minutes, they had enough.
That's it.
And so it started to turn into a
riot.
not a riot, no, a Fluxus event. And some of the students went up on the stage and tried to take off John Cage's necktie and take off his jacket and stuff like that. And he just sat there imperturbably and went on. So it was,
Do you know
pretty
empty
much, it
words?
was pretty much pandemonium
it's
after an
wonderful.
hour or so.
Empty words.
And then he finally stopped. And when he stopped, I remember this very clearly, there was a moment of general silence. And basically the whole audience then jumped to its feet and gave him a standing ovation. It went on for about 20 minutes. I mean, he knew he was a great manipulator of crowds.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
Oh, yeah.
It was a memorable event.
Well, speaking of John Cage, this is a class on John Cage.
Well, I'm glad the subject came up.
Well, maybe there's more to be said.
Yeah.
Well, he also happened to be a composer,
Yes,
Absolutely.
which is something that many people forget.
yeah, absolutely.
This year, there's been so much talk and blah blah about John Cage, but most of it, as far as I can see, has had very little relationship with his music.
Yeah.
It's mostly about this man, the myth around him, the aura
Yeah.
of his magnetic personality, and so on, and relatively little attention has been paid to his music. Now, he may not have been, the greatest composer of classical music, but he did write some good music at certain periods of his life anyway. For instance, in the 40s, much of the music of the 40s, which is sort of tonal, which is tonal in fact, and the opposite extreme, the very difficult, severe serial pieces or quasi-serial pieces of the 50s. And I would add, and I think a few people would too, the very late pieces that he wrote, which are often called the number pieces.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what he was doing in those pieces, but I have noticed that, strangely enough, they tend to sound good.
Computer was doing it for him.
Well, I don't know.
I do know that.
You do know that?
Absolutely. We know the person who did the program, what's his name?
Andrew Colvin?
Andrew, yeah.
Well,
I'm not convinced that.
He's coming up with the
computer
timings,
should get so
just
much
plugging in
credit.
equations.
computers tend to be pretty dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
And
if
John
you-
Cage did have
if you feed
talent.
them some interesting problems, if you give them if you put the problematic
Yes,
in
what I'm
focus,
saying is I
computer
think
does
that
it.
John Cage had some idea that somehow explains why these pieces tend to sound good. I don't think it's because of the computer.
I don't.
I think he actually was a very smart man and a quite talented man also.
Yeah.
He had very interesting ideas. He had a lot of terrible ideas too, but he did have some good ones.
Mm.
And there's something going on in those leg pieces. I don't know
agree.
what it is.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean,
The chords sound good.
the chords sound great.
Yeah.
We were just talking recently about a piece which is called 101. The very end of Cage's life, and I believe it's 1991, so he died in 92. Died in August 92. 91 he wrote, I don't know if it was very quickly, but he, between I guess 89 and his death, he wrote 3 big pieces for orchestra, 101, 102, and 103. For the 101 was for the Boston Symphony, 102 I believe was for Philadelphia, and 103 I think was for the New York Philharmonic. And these were all commissioned works, and they weren't long. They were under 20 minutes. So he brought, he used the focus of the social necessity of creating a piece for large orchestra, but putting it in a surprisingly short time span. That is, I mean, some of his work of the kind that were reflecting images of the cosmos or relationships between stars and other cosmic matter had open-ended, I mean, they had distinct maximum durations, but they were quite long pieces. Here, he had the knowledge to either that or by request, give us a 15-minute piece or give us a 12-minute piece or whatever. He just did that. And these pieces are remarkable. They're all tonal. They all have a tonal center. So even though by chance configurations and computer generated algorithms, he obviously said, okay, we need the note E flat 73% of the time, as opposed to all the other notes. So these, however that note appears, it keeps appearing, and it keeps appearing in one register. So the orchestration is such that many of the instruments can play that note, that single note, which appears as a unison and then ends up very often cutting right across, because these pieces have no conductor, and all the parts are written in his style of, how do you call it, what do you call these, bracket style. And the bracket says, play this note or these notes between minute X, minute and second X, and get out by then. And so you do it. You can come in where you want within that time frame and get out where you want in that time frame. So that's the way these pieces are written, and each instrument in the orchestra, so all the strings, for example, don't play as a string ensemble, they play as an individual. And the whole idea of these pieces is to democratize the orchestra with no conductor, no authority, and put the authority into the hands of all 100 and some odd players. And this isn't anything new, but it's brilliant the way he did it. And I think the results, as Frederic points out, are even more astonishing, because whatever he put into the original conceptual idea, that is to produce these layers of unisons, or sometimes multiple unisons, that prolong themselves throughout the piece, and these remarkable chords, sometimes sounding like, sometimes like an old-fashioned 1950s big band, where 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 6 saxophones,
8 French horns or something. You know, the stuff he did, he really pulled out all the stops. I mean, he just went like, you know, a clever composer would. Let's say someone like John Adams, for example, and say, you know, how can I, you know, how can I, you know, write a passage that'll sound like Duke Ellington, but it isn't Duke Ellington. Cage did that in his pieces. It's astonishing.
Well, let's not exaggerate.
That's my middle name, Frederic.
Well, there's a tendency to be uncritical, I think, with regard to somebody like this.
Yeah, well, may I just, because I had a question before you were going to say this. 'Cause I
You
wanted
don't know what I'm going to say.
You already said it.
Well,
Well, no, I am uncritical. I'm just being, you know, having a renewed love affair with John Cage, but I wish he would get out of my life right now as well, because he's already occupied as much space as, you know, as we need.
Well, unfortunately, we are in a class about John Cage.
Yeah, I know. I'm aware of that, but what I was about to ask, as you just came up with a thing about criticism, in this class on John Cage, I would like to know from the people sitting in front of me, how does this figure and his music strike you right now, even in this year of his
Well, I don't want to know
centenary?
this.
Okay.
I think we should do the talking. I think the
What does
students should
Richard
listen.
say?
Yeah,
Let's
Richard's the
vote.
boss. What does Richard say?
What?
Let's vote, what did you say?
Let's a vote on.
No, no voting. No, I think we should be autocratic. This is Richard's class, and he should decide.
Exactly.
It's the Leninist principle of democratic centralism. You consult the views of the people concerned, and then one person decides. In this case, it's Richard.
I agree.
Cage was an old-fashioned composer. He was also a preacher. He was very conservative in his views. He may have called himself an anarchist, but he was more like a libertarian than somebody like Bakunin or Kropotkin. He was certainly very, very shy on the subject of social protest. He was a fence sitter during the period of the Vietnam War, like Merce Cunningham. Neither of them would come out at all to take any kind of position on this subject, thus disappointing many of their radical colleagues in the arts, notably the Living Theatre.
And Cornelius Cardew.
And Cornelius Cardew and a lot of other people, because who felt quite correctly, I think, that if people like Cage and Cunningham had taken some kind of position on the subject, it would have been a very good thing.
Yeah.
But they did not. So Cage was not a revolutionary by any means. He was a conservative. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. On the contrary, but it's something that tends to be overlooked in much of the blah blah, which is that Cage was just a very traditional composer. And I could prove it too if you have a copy of the Etudes Australes here, which maybe you do, one of you,
I don't.
somewhere around, but I can show you. Well, I mean, you just have to take my word for it. Oh, you happen to have the score?
It's in the reserves
Well,
in the library.
okay, but if you look at the score, really, take a look at it, and it's quite long, you know, there are 32 of these etudes. And they're all more or less written in the same, using the same technique, but if you actually go through them, and I've played all of them, you will be struck by the fact that there is nothing unplayable. all of the chords are perfectly playable. Now, he probably arrived at this with some help from great Zoltan, for whom he wrote it. But it certainly involved a great deal of time and painstaking effort to eliminate all of the absurdities which must have been present in the original transcriptions from the star atlases and so forth and so on. He weeded out everything that was not practically played. And this is a proof of his, what do you call it?
Compliance.
His willingness to submit to the disciplines required by the classical tradition. Something which is very, very difficult to find today among those who call themselves composers.
Because they're writing unplayable music.
I think we should save this for tomorrow's discussion.
Okay.
Let's stick to John Cage.
Are you?
I have a question. Could you explain, Mr. Rzewski, in what way 433 is something traditional and conservative?
Oh, I was just gonna raise 433.
Is that conservative and traditional?
Well, yes, it has 3 movements. That's very traditional.
Yeah.
It's 3 movements.
It's shocking in a way.
What?
It's shocking.
Well, aside from the 3 movements, what about the rest of the?
It's also traditional in the sense that it was not new.
Who did that?
The first silent piece, to my knowledge, was written by a man named Alphonse Allais in 1884.
Wow.
Yes, it's called Les Grandes Douleurs sont muettes.
How do we write Ali?
Pardon me?
Ali?
Allais.
Was it completely silent from one? Was it completely silent from beginning to end, or was it a silent section in the middle of something?
Yes, well, Alphonse Allais was primarily a writer, a humoristic writer, something like Mark Twain. But he dabbled in all of the arts. Now, at that time, there was a movement called Les Arts Incohérents, which was quite successful. They had several annual exhibitions, and it was an early precursor of the Dadaists, if you like, or the Surrealist movement. And he was active in this group. One of the things that he included in this particular exhibition was was actually what it is a single page of empty music paper. But it is a piece of music, and it's called Les Grandes Douleurs sont Incohérentes. The great griefs or great pains are silent. And he explains that it's a funeral march. And a true funeral march, and true music expressing grief is silent. And so this is, I think, the first historical instance of a silent piece of music. So just as, the first white painting was not by Rauschenberg, it was by Malevich, 1915 or something. White painting.
The first chance piece was by Mozart.
There you go.
Which?
Mozart, the piece for, I forget the title of it, the name
Dice
of it.
game or something.
It's for dice, and the piece is composed through throwing dice.
So in that sense, in other words, so this 433 thing belongs already quite hoary tradition.
Well, what about the ideas behind it, which maybe were different than the silent funeral march?
Well, if you ask my personal opinion, I don't think Cage's ideas were that interesting. He was, as an anarchist, he's not as interesting as Kropotkin or Bakunin.
Well, it's,
As a religious thinker, he's not as interesting as, say, Martin Buber.
But he's coming directly from Thoreau. I mean, that was his real American
Yes, I know.
rebellious roots.
Yes, I know.
Anti-government roots,
I find Thoreau boring also. But that's my personal opinion. And Cage keeps on harping about the same things over and over and over again. He's boring as a thinker. And his infatuations with various people like Marshall McLuhan or Buckminster Fuller, I mean, this is not the mainstream of philosophy. These are, figures of mass culture of a certain period, most of whom are forgotten now.
what about the Asian connection?
Yes, well, what about it? I mean,
Well, that's a very important part of his thinking is,
well, you may think it's important, but as far as I'm concerned, the only things that are important in the case of this man's work is the music. I don't give a damn about his ideas of Buddhism or whatever.
well, what about the music of the silent piece?
What about it?
Well, isn't that somewhat unusual in the Western tradition? He said it was his most important piece.
I know. Yes, he told me, I asked him also that if he had a political piece, and he said his only political piece was this one.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
433. I can understand that. Yeah,
well, I understand it too,
yeah.
but I do not consider this to be a major contribution to the art of music. I mean, I've played it myself a number of times. I did a recording for the radio in Cologne. And the way I did it was to simply open the doors and close them of the big studio, so that you could hear the traffic going on outside. And, okay, obvious, easy solution to the problem. It's sort of interesting in the sense that it offers the performer an opportunity to come up with some kind of creative solution as to how to distinguish the three movements. But aside from that, you have to admit there isn't very much in it.
Well, there's a lot in it, there's the whole world in it.
The whole world.
Yeah, I mean, it's directing attention to the environment. He said he was more interested in listening to the environment, that's not an accurate quote, but than to music. He
I
wasn't
know.
really interested in music. So
That was because he lived in New York and was probably deaf.
Well, he didn't always live in New York, and he wasn't deaf.
Well,
If he was deaf, he couldn't have heard the environment and, enjoyed that as music. That's a fairly radical idea.
Well, listen, we were all three of us bringing that up. We were involved in a performance of. Excuse me, just
No,
don't
really.
forget what you were saying. And just to continue the thought of, in a performance that we did all together with winter music. You were playing with Cornelius Cardew in Palermo, and at the very end, as it says in the score, open the windows.
I don't think it says
it
that.
doesn't
Yes,
say that.
It doesn't say that in the
No.
score?
No, that was his idea.
Oh, that was his idea on the spot. Well,
Yeah.
okay, so we did.
It was a cold night, too.
It was a cold night, it
New
was
Year's
very
Eve.
noisy out, it was New Year's Eve,
It was winter.
and that caused it was winter. It was actually December 31st, and it caused a mild riot in the audience.
No.
I mean, the people
The
got
mild
No, it was
riot
New
was
Year's
the
Eve.
Philippines.
And
Palermo.
Oh.
Sorry. You were gonna ask.
Well, actually, I was just about to say that I'd heard the first recording, which I guess was in Palermo, of 433 or Milano, and there was a riot. And
There was a riot.
You heard the first,
the first the recording of the first performance, or one of the first performances
Oh, and
that
you
take
can hear the
place in
riot?
Italy, and people were
Freaked out.
freaking out.
Where did you hear this recording and when was this recording?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting. It was this contemporary dance ballet, the Ballet Pré-Locage, which is a French ballet
Oh, yeah,
performance with this sound of a riot from 433. And it was really interesting because the ballet was kind of boring, and because there was a soundtrack of this riot, people weren't bothered by screaming at each other and like fighting whether we're gonna leave the concert or not, and like everyone got really angry, people started running away.
In reality, in the performance.
Well, I think
dance
I think all
performance.
three of us have been present at various events, similar events in Italy. You don't need John Cage.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
But it's just, I don't know, we were talking about riots and if they still exist or not.
Well, I mean, there's moments. The question. I think there's several. I mean, the 433 thing. I think I tend to agree with Frederic. Is a completely uninteresting piece of music.
It's not something you want to hear every day.
No, I just
Yes,
heard.
you
We do
That's
hear every
exactly
day.
the point.
We do
Actually,
hear
I
every
just
day.
heard I heard a performance, I think it preceded or followed my own piece just last Sunday, Friday in Bologna. It was an orchestral piece, and they did an orchestral version of 433. So everybody is doing it in some way, and it was done by the conductor, and I thought it was a splendid piece of music theater. Because the conductor stood there, he had his stopwatch, and then he just everyone picks up their instrument, and he gives them a downbeat, 3 downbeats. I forget, they're divided in, the timings of 433. He gives them a downbeat, and they hold their instrument in position as if they're going to strike a string or play a note, and they just hold it, freeze it, and then he cuts them off and then gives them another downbeat. So there were 3 of these, starts and stops for the 3 movements, and so it became the audience. Incidentally, there was about 1,500 people. The audience stayed absolutely stark still. And it was really, that was astounding, because they expected something was going to happen, just like a pianist sitting at a piano.
was it announced as a performance of Cage?
Oh, it was announced as 433
Oh,
of John Cage.
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it
then
was-
they probably didn't expect it, because everybody knows Fourth. Not everybody.
Well, not the audience that was,
Mhm.
not necessarily, but in that case, no, what I was getting to, I mean, it's closer to what Richard wanted to move over to, which is the philosophical implication and the ideas coming out of equating silence with a form of meditation, or silence as a form of accepting the fact that there is never any silence anywhere in our lives, in our physical and physiological life, and that the noises or audible activity when you consciously sit in silence or stand in silence or do anything without making sound are a potentially, as far as I'm concerned, a very, very beautiful music. They create a very beautiful music. You just if we just listen even to this awful air conditioner right now, I mean, you can get into that, you can get really stoned on that. And that can, you know, lead you to, or just listen to the high frequency of these awful, deadly fluorescent lights, and these things that are killing us. But they have these incredibly high frequencies. Some of you should be able to hear them. I can't hear them. But they're there. And so all of our nervous tics, you know, when you sit and then you never sit still, you can't sit in absolute stillness. So you're always moving, you're always touching your clothes and, you know, doing something. And all of this becomes a very, very malleable material, either to be exploited as compositional material, or simply to listen to as a natural ongoing environmental symphony, if you want to call it that. Cage thought of it that way.
Right.
I would really like to know what your each individual favorite Cage piece is, if there is if you do have such a thing.
Well, I've listened to this music now for a good, let's see, since I probably heard the first piece of John Cage in 1952 or something like that. So what is that? That's 70 years, 60 years?
60 years.
All right. And I've had, you know, been more or less close to it for varying periods of time or across that time span. So that would change. But I remember the first time when I heard David Tudor play the music of Changes, which was around that time. It made a very strong impression on me, as did the piano concerto the first time I heard that. But I was also very impressed by the string quartet, which is totally different, and various other things, and the Seasons, very beautiful piece. So I don't know, I can't say there's a favorite.
Actually, I guess I should reframe my question. Is there one piece that still stays with you at this?
Well, there's one
day?
piece that I am frequently involved with because I perform it, and I perform it for money, which is the Etudes Australes. So I do a pretty good job on that one. And I also like it. It's a very good piece they're very good etudes. It gives me physical pleasure to perform these pieces, especially as I get older. It gives me a rewarding sense of physical gratification to see that I can still jump around the keys. In this way, you know how these pieces are written. They're written so that both hands cover the entire keyboard. So there's a lot of it's actually a piece of choreography for the two hands, which is not surprising considering how much of Cage's work was involved with the art of dance. So it's a very, very good idea that he had, and I've never seen anyone else take this idea up. For some reason, it's an idea that I haven't seen in any other context. This idea of the two hands completely independently covering the keyboard. Very simple and elegant idea. And as I say, very well done, because he was very careful to write it in such a way that you can actually play it. So I guess maybe that's the piece that I feel closest to.
What's your favorite piece?
Well, this isn't my class, so Richard, what's your favorite piece?
It's not as an interlude.
Ah.
Conservative.
Yeah, and I have to say there are two that span about 50 years. So Credo and Us is one, simply because it's the closest that Cage ever came to expressing himself with elements of American jazz. There's a real blues in it, and that endears me to the fact that he.
There are several pieces of that period that sound like boogie woogie.
Yeah. Anyway, and then jumping to 1991 and the 101 piece I talked about before. Those large symphonic.
Is that the one with the film?
No, that's
103.
103, I think.
That's longer than. That's
Yeah,
like
maybe.
an hour long.
That's another. Yeah.
I have a video of that.
I think that's with the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something to be said for in terms of relationship to society and to the economic realities of music making in general in our time, for those of us who continue to act as composers, and the special relationship between new music makers, that is, the real ones like Cage, and I would include Morton Feldman and Earl Brown, among others, in this historic community. The relationship between these musicians and the symphonic orchestra as a institution, as a living museum, which it is. It is a living museum, and it hardly ever recognizes anything contemporary compared to the repertoire that it's really good at playing. But what I've noticed recently is that, and it isn't that the times are changing, but there are hints in the air that you get from time to time in observing and listening, and even in my own experiences recently working with a rather mid-level symphony orchestra, where the communication barrier between composer and the institution, the system itself, because it's a vast, costly economic system which is producing every night of the year in every single concert hall around the world a repertoire of essentially classic standards. These are not classic standards. All the Mozart symphonies, the Beethoven symphonies, the Brahms symphonies, blah, 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 blah. All the piano concerti, violin concerti, all of that stuff, over and over and over again. So this occupies a gigantic social economic space in our own time that did not happen in the time of these composers' lives. Okay, so this is to be considered, and now orchestras like I happened to was at a part of a big Cage festival in London at the Proms at Royal Albert Hall, and one of the featured performing ensembles was the Royal Scottish Symphony Orchestra. Well, basically, it's an orchestra like any other. I mean, it just does what it does. You know, it has all of those instruments in it. You know, has a conductor's podium, and so on and so forth. And all of of the gesture, of, you know, tuning and everything, you know, everything an orchestra does. You know, all of this, there's an incredible hierarchy within the orchestra, also within sections, from section to section, from the concert master to the entire orchestra, to the first oboist, to the, you know, all of this stuff. There's a whole trip among these people that's very weird, and many of us will never know about any of it. But it's very interesting. But the long and the short of my long-windedness here is to say that there's been a hopeless relationship between this institution and much of contemporary music. Since at least since the end of the Second World War in 1945. So, and slowly, I think now, because performances are happening by these great orchestras, where they're either waking up or they're under the magical wand of people like Simon Rattle or some of these other European conductors. I forget the names of them now.
Peter Etudes.
Peter Etudes is one of the leading ones, thank you. And who are now somehow working with these same large ensembles and actually getting them to play this music beautifully.
What music?
The Cage orchestral music.
How often does that get played?
I don't know, Frederic. I don't know. Probably not often. But in this year, with the centennial, there's been an awareness. There's been performances all over the place, and large and small ensembles, and I think superb performances have come out, and you don't get superb performances with indifferent musicians. So musicians seem to be changing their attitude toward this music, and maybe finding even pleasure in doing it.
You mean the orchestra members or the conductors?
I think both. Certainly the conductors, because some of them really are into this stuff, and it's just like, you know, the second, you know, the third row of the second violins who like are sitting there laughing. Oh my God.
Well, what you're saying may be true, but I would like to see the evidence to support this. I mean, I could easily imagine that someone could take quite a different point of view, and it might be more in conformity with observable data. That is to say that the orchestras around the world are continuing to play old music, and in fact,
Well, that's for sure. That's their bread and butter.
you know, I could imagine that this is a very subjective interpretation, and I'm not convinced by, you know, your particular Pollyanna-ish view of things. I personally, I have no feelings about it whatsoever, because I have hardly anything to do with orchestras.
No, none of us do.
So I don't feel about it one way or the other. To me, it just seems to me irrelevant. And in fact, I have the impression that if these orchestras are going to survive at all, it will be in the form of the classical orchestra, say around 1830, when the first conductor stepped onto the podium. And furthermore, I suspect that these orchestras, if they survive, they will do so as amateur institutions, not as professional, which was also the case around
at that time.
They were either supported by rich aristocrats, or they were free associations of amateurs who just liked to play together.
That's right.
It wasn't until later on that they became, became hired workers, which is what they are today.
Yeah, sadly.
Well, we were talking about this over breakfast, Alvin and I, actually, I don't think, you didn't sound particularly optimistic this morning.
Yeah, it changed, well,
Second coffee.
yeah, it varies. Again, I share your views, everything you just said, especially the fact that, beginning with the fact that we have very little to do with these institutions and probably never will in our lifetimes. We simply weren't, even though we were groomed and educated to go in that direction, one of the biggest learning experiences that I had was in fact in a chance meeting with all of us in Rome in 1966 and beginning to make a form of spontaneous music with available objects and amplified sounds and any instruments that came into our possession or that we fancied. And this sudden awareness that music, a very powerful and magnetic and a music full of lasting potential and attraction could be made by just us with any old piece of junk that we had in our possession and around us, and the will that we put together to actually work it out spontaneously in the same space. So almost by declaration, those dreams, those long-time dreams of writing your 10th symphony or your 30th piano concerto or whatever, those went out the window, just like that, bang. There was just no need for that. And much of that experience, that original experience, put us, again, this is more for talk tomorrow night, but it's relevant right now, but put, I think, all of us in a position to simply be aware and fully aware that there were other music that
Coffee break.
Yeah, right. That there were other musics to be made. And in the, and again, to tie this up with the John Cage thing, that in this experimental tradition, the music of MEV was just carrying this idea on that there were simply other ways to make music, and it wasn't an act either of revolution or an act of disrespect or provocation. It was an act of necessity. It was an act not only of necessity, but of one which immediately associated our work with a living wage. That we, Frederic is laughing at me again. Fuck you!
Let me just point out that if we continue to talk about MEV, there won't be anything to talk about tomorrow.
There'll be plenty to talk about.
46 years, it's gonna be.
No, I'm just tying this up with John Cage, because, I mean, Cage was the original experimental motor. I mean, he wasn't the original, he was a force. And that force, without even knowing him well at the time, was one that we eventually, whose benediction we came under and received.
I
and-
didn't.
Well, I did.
Well, then speak for yourself.
Well, I am. Okay, no, but what I'm saying, Frederic, I mean, you had earlier experience because you were, I mean, you were very closely associated, from another period.
I loved John Cage.
Yeah.
He was very important for me, and he gave me very good advice. However, we differed on a number of issues, notably political ones.
Yeah.
And
Did you ever discuss the Vietnam War with him, for instance, or the things you said he copped out on?
I doubt that, because whenever I came together with John Cage, I was in a subordinate position. It was he who called the shots, and rightly so. I respected the man enormously, and I wanted to hear what he had to say, and he gave me very good advice. But I don't think he approved of the things I was doing. In fact, less and less so. So, although there was only one time when we had a really difficult situation, which was right around here in Woodstock, when Carl Berger organized a very unusual event. I don't think you were present for that.
I wasn't here, no.
That would have been 1977.
Mm.
Carl, who organized the Creative Music Studio, and who's coming tonight.
Yes.
Organized a discussion and invited a very unlikely combination of people, such as John Cage, and I happened to be there also at the same time. Charles Warrenen came up. The drummer of the Black Panther, what was his name?
I know.
Sonny Murray.
Oh, right.
Sonny Murray. And Carla Bley, and
That's an amazing group.
a very, very odd, unlikely
Yeah,
mixture
unlikely,
of people. And Ursula Oppen's recording of the People United had just come out. So John Cage was sitting at the bar, and I gave him a copy of the LP. Now, this discussion was broadcast on live public radio all over the NPR, all over the United States. Another unlikely.
Yeah, really.
Good old days.
And there were various people said various things, and then John Cage was talking, and he was, I guess the subject was sort of revolving about politics. And suddenly, John Cage pointed to me, and I came under attack in a most unexpected way, because I don't remember, I think it didn't have any particular connection with anything. And he said, Rzewski is for a police state.
Wow.
He said, look, he's just given me this record. The People United will never be defeated. That's the police. Rzewski wants the police.
Wow. Was he drunk?
No, I don't think so. I think he was, I don't remember now why, this, because it completely took me aback. I didn't expect this at all. But it did seem like unfair. It was not a correct thing to do on national public radio. What?
Well, now it reminds me of a situation also with Cage at New Music Chicago, where he, in a similar panel, after a concert of Glenn Branca. You all know who Glenn Branca is? yeah, no, no. It's a guy who, he's still very active.
I don't know how active, nobody knows who he is.
Well, I don't know, but anyway, his thing was very, very large ensembles of electric guitars playing as loud as they could be amplified.
Well, like Reese Chatham.
Yeah, by Reese, yeah, and in very, very special tuning relations, so the tuning systems were very, anyway, it made a very phenomenal sounding music that was very hard to.
I think Alan Bryant's music was much more.
Actually, it was, actually. Anyway, it was very hard to be in the same room with because the levels were really murderous and very, well, very, very dangerous. So Cage, at a panel the next day, after hearing one of these pieces and actually feeling ill himself that evening, I was with him, and then he got up and was asked by a panelist about this piece, and he said, "Oh yes, that music is fascist music." And now, the word fascist is a very easy word in the United States. It has much broader uses here. It has much more specific meanings in the rest of the world. But whatever it did, it set off a devastating reaction from Glenn Branca, who then somehow, like, I don't know in your case if you didn't actually get an apology from.
Oh, certainly not.
Yeah, no. But Cage then reversed his. He was. I don't know how it came about. He was forced somehow or convinced to revoke this appellation of fascist music to Glenn Branca.
Didn't you put Cage up to that in the first place?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
No.
Oh.
How-
I'm glad to know that.
Why?
I don't know, I somehow thought you had used it or,
No,
and that he picked it up from you.
No, I don't know.
It's
I would-
very
I would've
difficult.
ne- I
It's
would've
very
ne-
difficult to say.
I
what
would have
is-
never used that word. I would have never said fascist. It never would have occurred to me.
It's very difficult to say what is fascist music.
Well,
I don't know anyone who could really come up with a clear definition of what that might be.
well, there are, I mean, there is right under the magnifying glass of a lot of a large public right now is in fact a man who just walked into a Sikh temple
Oh, yes.
in Minnesota somewhere and wiped out a whole bunch of people, and who is part of a Nazi fascist organization, a music band that plays music which exalts the imagery and memory.
Yes, but is the music any different from any other pop music?
Well, the words are.
The words.
Yeah, that's, well, yeah.
Well, most of the time in pop music, you can't understand the
That's
words
true,
anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's a very tricky word to use when applied to the arts, and aside from the specific cases of people who engage.
Well, it's a tricky word even outside of the arts. It's
Yeah.
a tricky word in politics
That's-
because
yeah.
it means something when applied to a specific period of history
That's
and a
right.
specific part of the world.
That's right.
But when it is generalized, it's like talking about right and left in politics.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the right and left had made sense in the French revolutionary parliament.
Right.
In the late 18th
18th.
century, because the people the aristocrats sat over here and the bourgeois sat over there, right and left. But out of that context,
That's
it tends to lose its meaning.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
I'd like to go back to what you were talking about before, about the new music being more promoted by conductors and orchestras than it used to be.
Well, I don't have a lot of evidence for that.
But let me, I just want,
Go ahead.
what's left out of that equation is, or of this equation, is the audience. And I, just to be even more Pollyanna-ish,
Yeah.
think that the audience has changed to some extent.
Well,
So for instance, I was at this concert that the Philharmonic played, Stockhausen's Gruppen and Boulet's piece, you were there, and Ives. And it was in the Armory, which is a very large space. It was totally sold out for 2 nights and got a standing ovation.
yeah.
And I just found myself thinking, well, if this kind of music receives this kind of response,
Yeah.
why couldn't they do this every week? You know, why do they
Exact-
do this once a
exact-
year or once
Well,
every?
this is, we've been asking ourselves for that for
But I think they're
decades.
young.
They're young.
They were young, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was all ages.
Huh?
There were it was very diverse.
Yeah, it was all kinds of people.
Yeah.
But I think things have changed in that way. So, for instance, the West Coast, Michael Tilson Thomas knew a recent American music
He
a
does,
lot.
yeah.
Dudamel seems to do, he commissioned John Adams or an hour-long piece, which I heard, it wasn't my favorite, but I think something has changed, and Philip Glass sells out Carnegie Hall regularly. I mean, if Philip Glass is at Carnegie Hall, it's sold out. Now, a lot of this is PR, and everybody thinks, oh, Philip Glass, but even PR, I just think that things have
Still
changed
the music
somewhat.
of living composers.
Yeah.
It's living
And
composers.
Steve Wright, a lot of it is the big names, but not only the big names. Stockhausen's not really a big name like Philip Glass, but people really do react to this music, apparently. I mean, I saw it for myself.
My feeling
And a
is,
standing ovation at the end, too, I just, wasn't it? I think so.
well, I think, I agree, Richard. I think things are changing slowly. They're, in my opinion, much too late
Yeah.
for my lifetime.
Mm.
But it gives me great pleasure to see things like this,
Mhm.
to be part of things a little bit like this, and to know that that audiences, young audiences in particular, are turning out for these events, even though they may be PR'd to the hilt and everything program played in the Armory, and everybody knows the Armory is the new hip place in New York City for new music, and okay, so it's all part of a scene, but that doesn't take away from the content and the seriousness, and above all, the seriousness of the musicians who are now playing this stuff the way they always could, but are now doing it seriously.
Well, I'm not sure they always could, that's another thing.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this I don't know. I mean, there were events that historical ones. I think Frederic was there when the New York Philharmonic was stepping on
No,
contact microphones. You weren't there.
no.
You weren't at that. Playing pieces of Feldman and Earl Brown and so on, and they were very destructive. They were destructive. They basically refused to play the music.
That's what I mean.
And considered it not only an insult to their profession, but a form of dangerous viral infection that they had to come in contact with. Seriously, they thought that this would pervert their whole life if they had to play.
I think the situation has not changed for the majority of orchestras now around. There may be a few exceptions.
I don't know, I can't say.
You mean the club orchestras or just orchestras in general?
Well, I probably shouldn't say anything because I don't know that much. But even that tells you something.
Yeah.
Why don't I know that much?
Because you don't interest yourself in going to find out.
Well, I have a very good relation with orchestras. I'm not interested in them, and they're not interested in me, and so we have a perfect,
Perfect match.
yes.
Well, I can add one thing to this. I mean, there are essentially two geographic areas in music. One is the United States and one is Europe, essentially.
What about China?
Yeah, no, Japan.
I don't think that's another issue. and
Well,
I-
Japan has a very active
Really?
classical music.
Classical music.
Yeah,
How
there are
about
10
Russia?
orchestras in Tokyo.
As- yeah,
Isn't European and
China.
American
How about
music
Africa?
more popular in
I don't
Japan
know
than the
about
other
Africa.
way around?
The what?
Isn't American music and European music more popular in Japan than the other way
I'm not
around?
sure.
Well, so are
I
like
need a coffee,
American
man.
Some,
I
some
need
of
So
something else.
Americans are
All
sure.
right. Anyway, be it as it may, in this new geopolitical panorama in which we're, a world in which we're living, but the two central areas, for simplicity's sake, two musical cultural areas are the United States, Canada,
South America.
South America as well, and
Korea.
Korea and also possibly, and then this gigantic historical area which is called Europe, which can include everything from from Mongolia on the Pacific and north side all the way to North Africa, essentially. So in the European tradition, which is the tradition I'm most familiar with, all of the arts are financed by the state, so that as taxpayers pay for whatever's out there, whether it's your ballet company, your opera company, your symphony orchestras, your radio orchestras, and so on and so forth, and television as well, so you pay for it. And that's not 100%, but it always was 100%, but now it's shifting a little bit. But anyway, those are the things. So that new music is a publicly financed activity, and because in the countries such as Germany, above all, France, Austria, Italy, Spain, and then all the Scandinavian countries, including Holland especially. Sorry?
Not anymore.
Well, I know that. I know the situation, but what I'm saying is that the presence of a cultural consciousness about having a certain percentage of new music commissioned and performed by state-funded institutions, not private ones, state ones, is a very long and successful tradition which is still ongoing. So therefore, the amount of new music that is heard in official institutional situations in Europe is still far more than anything that happens in this country. There are individual cities in this country which specialize, such as San Francisco, such as New York City, sometimes Chicago, sometimes Houston, and that's about it in the whole of the United States. Yes.
Was that part of the reason why you moved to Italy?
No. I didn't move to Italy with anything in mind except to run away from home. Seriously. I was too young, I didn't know anything, and whatever happened by chance in my life. So I didn't plan or have any vision of anything. But no, going to Europe, yes, I knew there were some festivals like Darmstadt and Donaueschingen and this and that. I knew that, and yeah. But anyway, the public consideration for the contemporary arts is a much more diffused and serious one in Europe, all of Europe, because people pay for it out of their own pockets. It goes like gasoline tax. This is a cultural tax, and it goes to support all of these institutions and all of the, eventually all of the students who are in conservatories who will then replace older people, and so the thing is self-perpetuating.
But it's getting less.
It's getting less, but on the other hand, a group like, I'm familiar with the group Ensemble Moderne in Frankfurt. Do you know who they are? Well, they started as just like a rough and tumble group of very talented young instrumentalists who wanted to just play new music and nothing but. And now that was 25, 30 years ago. And now they have two buildings that they own of their own. One is a school where their own players are the instructors and teach kids beginning at the age of 5 years old and instruct them in new music only, period. So this is an institution of a special kind. Pierre Boulez has made another institution in Paris, IRCAM, which is very similar. Has a huge didactic program in teaching and scholarships and so on and so forth. So these are phenomenal institutions that have ongoing, especially in their role as didactic, not only performance and commissioning, because they have big budgets and they're able to have an ongoing life. There's nothing like that in the United States. There's groups, there are individual ensembles like, Philip Glass, Steve Wright, Bang on a Can, who are remarkable for having, in my opinion, for having beat the system again by skirting the whole institutionalized music thing and creating their own groups and creating their own music with their groups.
Another thing that is happening here, which you may or may not be aware of, is that there are a lot more groups, not just for Philip Glass's own music.
Yeah, I'm aware, yeah.
In New York, I don't know how many groups there are now.
This is true in Europe as well. There's a proliferation of
groups.
of new music groups.
There must be 10 or 20 or 30 groups.
How do
in
they
New York.
finance themselves?
Well, I don't know.
They don't.
Ask Miguel.
Very, very difficultly. There's very few funding bodies. We basically, people perform for almost nothing, so.
Well, some group like ICE, that
ICE,
group,
well,
they've got
that's-
some big funding
yeah.
behind them, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's the exception.
Yeah,
rather
it's
than
the
the
exception.
Well, that's amazing, yeah.
But there are a lot of them.
The fault is the schools. The schools are turning out artists who have no employment. This is, I think, a very irresponsible attitude on the part of these schools, especially the American schools, because they're in it for money. The European schools are more careful about limiting the number of students they accept, whereas the American schools will take on as many students as there are people willing to pay for it. And they belch out these students at the end of 4 or 6 or 8 years who call themselves artists, and then they find that the real world is not interested in what they have to say artistically. I think this was always the case. It was true in my case. I had, as Alvin pointed out, certainly a very high-class education, and I was made to believe by institutions like Harvard and Princeton that as having been accepted by them, I didn't have to worry about anything for the rest of my life. I could get a Fulbright to go to Europe and come back and put patches on my elbows, smoke my pipe, and tell stories for the rest of my life, just like Roger Sessions and Walter Piston did. But what happened? The reality was that these great composer gigs disappeared.
That's right.
Now, instead of having Walter Pistons and Roger Sessionses, you have people like yourselves, or a bit older perhaps, people in their 30s who will work 70 hours a week for 1/3 the salary that these people used to be paid. The rest of you, tough cookies.
Listen, they're all gonna quit.
Well,
No, they won't.
I think it's time to pay some serious attention to this question, because it seems to me that especially the American universities take a very irresponsible attitude.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Frederic, the inner motoric energy in a living culture doesn't take these things into consideration. They take total chances, and
What do you mean, the living culture? What's that?
well, I mean, it's the need for the next generation to take leadership and become the inventors of a new music, or the participants and reshaping the old recent music, or whatever music they want to do, or whatever cultural activity they want to do. I mean, today this takes place largely. We're talking a bunch of like old prehistoric, dinosaurs. I mean, today people are talking about mostly their main concerns are about multimedia.
I'm not talking like a dinosaur. I
No,
have
that's
exactly
not- I'm
the
talking
same
like-
concerns.
I'm talking like a dinosaur. I'd say, in this case, the we, the second person plural the first person plural was me. What I mean is, there are genetic, as it were, I'm using this word in a poetic sense, there are genetic components to a culture which they don't necessarily guarantee anything, but they can ensure an ongoing life of creativity. And I'm just saying this to contrast my dear colleague Frederic, who is rightly saying,
What are
this is,
genetic components?
never mind.
Well, no,
I'm talking about, I said, in the poetic sense of the word, I'm not talking about.
poetic sense.
Yes, of course. Because we can't find we don't know the genome of a culture.
I don't think
Anthropologists.
anybody does.
Anthropologists study this stuff. I'm not an anthropologist. What I'm just saying is that there are elements in a given culture, such as a young culture like the American one, which is extremely young, extremely lively, extremely creative. Well, could be decadent as well. But anyway, it has a built-in mechanism which allows it to recreate itself and reinvent itself. That's all I'm talking about, is recreation, propagation, reinvention.
And I don't think people are interested in recreating themselves. All they want is make it as a job.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm saying, this does not lead to a job. This doesn't lead to anything.
You mean music?
Any kind of creative activity.
Well, sometimes it does.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does, but you don't know anymore.
Well, for example, I'll give you a good example. I've been going to the University of Cincinnati every year for 15 years or so, for like a week in the month of June for some kind of festival, which is stopped now. And then they tell me, this is quite an old school, the College Conservatory of Music.
Yeah.
And my friend Joel Hoffman has been teaching there for God knows how long. And he tells me now that they're going to change the orientation of the school. They're basically going to get rid of this so-called serious music, or gradually. Instead of teaching people how to be academic composers. They're going to shift focus to practical things like film music, commercial music.
Well, good. Practical applied music, why not?
And this seems to me like a good idea, and it's an example that maybe should be emulated by lots of other
A lot of people are doing that. I
similar
mean,
institutions.
there are institutions like the Berklee School of Music in Boston, for one.
That's been there for a long time.
There's Cal Arts that we all know and love. I mean, has one of the, a very important place that actually produces good film composers. And because they study both cinema in the cinema department and the music department at the same time. And I don't know how many other schools in the United States but have these, what we would call applied music. I mean, you could say this also for a sideline that's very popular in America, people who specialize in writing for a concert band. Band music is a very engaging and a lucrative profession, which some people do very well. We don't even know who they are. I mean, I actually do know a few of these people, but
Music technology is another.
and music technology is another. Yeah, I mean, so there are places, and the world that we are closely associated with, which is classical composition or classical contemporary, as it's now badly called, is a world which is possibly the most endangered species of all of these.
Now here I think we should stop, because this is the subject of tomorrow's discussion.
Great.
Is
Okay.
music finished?
Yeah, great. All right, there you go.
I think
Anyway,
we're
it's
starting to get
time
into-
to stop anyway. I have to go practice. I have to go
Okay.
practice the piano. You mentioned-
Yes, we got a piano for you.
Okay, good.
And then tonight's concert will be wonderful. So come tonight, 6:40.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
6:45 in Blum Hall, and tomorrow night at 6:30 in Blum Hall, and composers come at 2 in Bard
Are we
Hall.
playing our concert is in Blum Hall?
Yeah,
The MEV concert?
tonight.
No.
Oh,
That
no,
was in
MEV
Olin.
concert is Thursday night in Olin, which is big.
Right, okay.
What time on Thursday?
Huh?
What time on Thursday?
Thursday at 8. And, I guess we'll save the questions for tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, bring some hard questions.
and some liquor too.
So, on that note, see you all the next.
Yeah, thank you a lot.
Thank you.